everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Find a Moment podcast. We have really enjoyed this series on worship, and we are very excited to end the series by introducing you to one of our friends. So we are excited to introduce my dear friend and also my boss of sorts, Brooks Joyce,
Yeah.
who is the worship director at our church, Port City Community Church here in Wilmington. And you've been on staff at the church in some capacity or other since 2005. So, 2 decades.
Yeah.
And we just thought that you would be a great person to bring in to have a voice in our conversation, because all these worship talks and things that Gretchen and I have discussed over the last couple episodes, you bring a special experience to that, leading a team of worship leaders and the worship band, but then also just the way that you live your life and the way that you naturally lead others through a lifestyle of worship. And so I think we would just love to hear a little bit about who you are.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I feel really genuinely honored to be here. I think because of the nature of my role, I'm in the background. And so just to be asked to share what's your perspective feels really, really special to me. So I am really honored to be here. My background, I always joke about this whenever people tell me or ask me, tell us a little bit about yourself. I don't know where to start. And so I often go, well, my parents met. That's usually the beginning. But I was raised essentially by a single mother with the help of my grandparents and my mom's side of the family. And that was really special to me. Like, I love my mom. I love my grandmother. I really saw the Lord in the way that they loved us, the way that they loved others. And so I spent a lot of weekends with my grandparents growing up. They lived about an hour from us. And my grandmother, her big idea of fun was making me read the Bible. And so that's what she would have me do. She would make me just stay in my room there and read the Bible. And she would say, you can come down when you can tell me, all the books of the Old Testament in order, or when you can tell me, what were some of David's brothers' names or whatever. I don't actually know if they're named in the Bible. I'm just
Keep you looking.
keep me looking, still looking for that. And I had an older brother, Rory, and he's my best friend. I just adore him. And moved around a little bit in the Charlotte area, and then we settled in Wilmington in 1997. And I've been here ever since. I met my wife in 2002. We dated for about 5 years, and we got married in 2007. So we've been married for 18 years, and we have 2 children, Evelyn and Bennett. And yeah, I've been working at the church, like you said, for about 20 years. And I love the church. And so much of who I am is because of all of these things that I mentioned, but also in large part because of Port City. The way that leadership has loved me, how they bared with me, how they've, extended grace and forgiveness towards me. And so much of what I do now, I want to give back. I want to give back to the church, and I want to give back to the community. And so when it comes to worship, I learned so much from an organization called 10,000 Fathers that was once based in Atlanta, but now in Colorado Springs. And I attended in 2020. And it really it changed my life. You have these moments in your life where you're like, gosh, this moment was an awakening. And I've had many of those, and that moment in 2020, and that process, that 18-month process, really did change so much of who I am. And the beauty of that program, that process, is it's meant to help shape you as a worship leader, as a worship pastor. But the byproduct is it shapes you as a father, as a friend, as a brother, and as a husband. And so I think Angel would testify to this process really helped grow Brooks into who God called him to be in fullness. So from there, I really developed a desire to bring something like that into our context. for the sake of the church, for the sake of Port City. And so that is where I launched Akedah Worship, was from that place to give back to Port City and help train up worship leaders, and hopefully they would see the same thing. Like, come learn how to be better worship leaders, how to be better worship pastors, but leave being more fully equipped as husbands, as wives, as mothers, as fathers. So yeah.
So Akedah Worship, you mentioned that's the worship school that
Yeah.
you and your team at Port City have developed to kind of transfer the same set of skills
Hmm.
to our local church leaders, worship leaders. But that's something that Maggie mentioned when
Yeah.
we interviewed her for
Hmm.
wrapping up our series on identity.
Yeah.
And she talked I mean, that was a huge transformational part and you guys are still
Yeah.
with that same team of people working through that, but she was still saying already how significant
Yeah.
that experience has been. And that I think that just speaks to, your heart to give back, but then also what 10,000 Fathers did to equip you and to inspire you
Yeah.
to continue that transfer of
Yeah.
growth and equipping. But yeah, she talked so much about, I mean, that was really a huge part of
Mhm.
her identity journey,
Yeah.
her most recent experiences with that. And I know I'm not in that first group of the worship team to go through it, so I can't wait for the next
I
for it
can't
to
wait
open
to,
up
yeah.
again, because
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
know.
be on
Yes,
your
I
list.
know. Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Gonna
So
be good.
the hope is to give it to the whole team.
Mhm.
It's starting in January or February. We have a couple dates. We launched somewhat small because we were like, we know we need to learn.
Mhm.
And it was like, man, if we give it to our whole team at once, we might fumble some things. And so starting small helped us fumble some things. And I think we are going to be able to come into next year a lot more confidently and a lot more knowledgeable. How do we, give this to people really well? And then, I really believe that you can kind of see a good model of discipleship, obviously, in the way that Jesus discipled people. And he started small. He started with 12 and then grew it from there. And that was kind of our heart too. It's like, okay, let's start small. Let's start with it, just this awareness that we have limited capacity. So let's give it to these people, and then let's lean on them to help us give it, to a bigger scale. And so yeah, it's been longer than we thought to. The original plan was, it'll take 12 months. But one of the things that we're learning, and we knew on the front end too, was walking with college students. They've got copious amounts of time. They they can come after class, they can come before class, in between, whatever. Full-time employees, full-time moms and dads, they do not have copious amounts of time. And then on top of that, they got vacations, all these things. And so we have had to like take long breaks, and unforeseen things have just shifted things. And so it was supposed to have been completed by now, but we will finish by the end of the year, and then we'll be ready to launch for the whole team next year. Yeah.
That's exciting though.
Hmm.
So I love hearing you share about Akedah. Can you explain a little bit more for our listeners of kind of what that is and what the process has been like?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons that we chose the name of that is because it does not, or I guess it does elicit some curiosity. That's not a word that everyone knows. It's intuitive. And so it comes from Genesis 22. It is the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22. And so Akedah is the Hebrew word for binding. And the reason that we chose this is because that's the first time in the Bible that the word worship appears. And so, kind of the heart of the worship school and our heart for worship in general is, we have come to know worship to mean singing songs. But according to scripture, worship is sacrifice, it's willingness to sacrifice. God asked Abraham, take your son, your beloved son, and lay him on an altar for me. And we know, obviously, God didn't intend for him to to sacrifice him. That's what people thought God was like. All the pagan gods, that's what they were like. And so God shows Abraham, this is what I'm like. I'm a good God. And the promised lamb, he's coming. and I will not spare my son. And so there's all this beautiful imagery there, but I love just to orient ourselves around worship is a willingness to sacrifice. And so the heart of Akedah Worship School is that we would go from worship leaders who lead songs to worship pastors who lead sacrificial lives.
That is so powerful.
Yeah, and I love that as it relates to Romans 12. In view of God's mercy, offer yourself, offer your body as a living sacrifice. This is your true and proper worship. And we can see from that instance in Genesis 22, we see the fullness of who God is. And so it's because of that that we can then offer ourselves.
Like, how do you get to that?
Mm.
Like, I guess you probably can't take me through the whole year long.
Yeah, no.
But, like, I just think of like, how do you navigate that transformation?
Yeah.
Because you think about that even just in our everyday life of like, how do I go from just
Mm.
living this way to I mean, that is just a true
Yeah,
paradigm
it
shift.
is. Yeah. That's a really good question. The pathway it's 3 tracks: character, competency, and commission.
Mm,
And so really the first 2 are meant to sort of serve as the transformation.
mhm,
And so Jesus, he says, anyone who comes after me must take up their cross and deny themselves. And a lot of us, we start there. Like, okay, that's what I got to do.
mhm,
But that wasn't Jesus' first invitation, right? It wasn't come and die.
mm,
It was come and follow me
mm,
and learn from me and discover who I am and who you are in me. And so once we discover who we are, then we can lay that person down for
mm,
the sake of Christ. And so the first track is meant to help you discover, who are you?
mhm,
Who has God called you to be? And a big point of emphasis for me, a lot of times when we do the identity exercise, a very common thing that we hear is the enemy says, I'm not good enough.
mhm,
God says, I am good enough. And I think that there's some nuance to that, but the truth is, if we were good enough, God's goodness wouldn't be all that necessary. And so it's in the revelation that, gosh, I am not enough. That's where God meets me. And I love 2 Corinthians 12. I pleaded with God 3 times to remove the thorn in my side, and he assured me his grace is sufficient. And so I will boast in my weakness. And so one of the things that we try to instill into people in track 1 is like, we love to submit our strengths before the Lord. God, use my strengths and essentially make me look good. But our true worship is also, God, you can have my weaknesses too. You can have my humiliation. You can have my embarrassment. Because what if you use that to your glory? And so I think even for me, that's a big thing. Like, God, you can have my voice. You can have the thing that I feel so deeply insecure in. I'll give that to you. And oftentimes when I go to speak at places, one of my prayers to God is like, God, if I fumble, if I can't get my heart rate under control, if my bones quake, and someone in that room goes, man, if that guy can do it, I can do it too. And I'm like, if that's the fruit, God, let me be humble enough to let that be the fruit. So, anyways, that's track 1. We're trying to help people just discover the fullness of who they are. And there's this great quote by Dallas Willard. He says, the more we have the character of Christ, the safer it is to have the power of Christ, because such great power requires great character if it's to be a blessing and not a curse.
mm,
And so track 1 helps to build the foundation that can bear good fruit that will be a blessing, because we've seen it time after time. The best songwriters, the best sermon writers, they're like living in secret sin. And those blessings don't end up being a blessing. They end up being a curse. And, gosh, whole churches crumble because of that. These catalogs of great songs written underneath this church's banner are like forbidden in the church because of one man's secret sin. And so track one, we build that foundation. And so then track two, competency, we try to just help people process what they're capable of. Because often we don't know. It's like, I'm not a good songwriter. Well, have you tried? You know, have you walked with the Lord in that? Have you been given tools for those things? I'm not a good communicator. One of the things that we do in track two is we have everyone, whether they're a musician or a worship leader, write devotionals, and they have to give them, some in some public space. And what's been so cool is like it's some of those people that were like, God didn't wire me that way. That once they see, well, when you work at it, when you try it, you're actually really good and you have something worth saying. So those are the first two tracks, and those are meant to sort of, again, rewire who we are, I guess, to help us fully discover who we are. And then track three goes to, now we're going to give that away. That's the commission part. So I've experienced this transformation. Now I want to help other people experience this transformation. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see.
That's amazing. And it's such a beautiful picture of the gospel and that discipleship life. I mean, I can see how a parent could use those same
Right.
principles.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's sanctifying
Mm,
just that whole process.
yeah.
And to have an environment in a church setting to have that level of like humility to go through that
Mm,
character
yeah.
thing. That's just so amazing and wise. And like you said, of churches that have fallen and all of
Yeah.
those kind of things. And that level of humility, I think, is what we need to
Yeah.
have in Christian community with each
Mm-hmm.
other
Absolutely. Yeah.
to break down we're all perfect and talented
Yeah. No.
and right. Wow.
I think too, it makes me think about what that does within the team
Yeah.
itself, because showing up on Sunday and with a big team, how many people are on our rotation right now?
Roughly 30-ish, I always say.
And at one time it was 40 plus.
Yeah.
So when you have, and it's a different configuration of musicians
Right.
and worship leaders every Sunday.
Yeah.
So when there's this kind of constant, I'll say revolving door, but like no Sunday is ever the same hardly as far as the
Right.
team goes. So you don't have a lot of time to build relationships that are like really tight with the people, because you don't know who you'll be with. And
Right.
for me, I'm on once a month, and I may or may not be close with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been 6 months since I was scheduled with somebody else,
Yeah.
Who's there that week. So it takes a long time to build deep relationships among the team, just with the nature of it,
Mm-hmm.
of scheduling. But to have something like that happening, even if it's with a smaller, how many people are in
It's
Akedah right now?
8.
8.
Yeah.
To even have that happening just among 8, and they're probably not all scheduled the same week either, but to see what will start happening within the team as those relationships grow. And I know that what happens within the relationships between team members outside of Sunday, when those relationships are authentic and they're built on humility
Yeah.
and trust,
Mm.
and people are being honest and real about what's happening in their lives, that allows what we do for our church on Sunday mornings to be so much more
Yeah.
authentic and real. Because you can't, I think I said this with whoever was in the green room one Sunday, but like, I can't do what we're doing with people who don't know what's happening in my life. And that was when
Yeah.
things were like, there were some really hard things happening,
Yeah.
but I just thought, I can't go out here and
Yeah.
pour my heart out to my
Mhm.
church and to the Lord with you guys not knowing
Yeah.
like what's really happening. And I was so grateful for the reception and just the care that came through that. So with that, I want you to just kind of describe a little bit, because you mentioned being part of this conversation is kind of contrasting what you typically do
Yeah.
work-wise,
Yeah.
or at least on Sundays. So will you just describe your role and what that looks
Yeah.
like?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, of course, that's how I know you, and you're like
Yeah.
my boss man.
Yeah. So I kind of worked my way up the church ranks, as it were. You can't see me on the podcast, but I'm using quotation marks.
Let's
I began in student ministries. I was an intern, and I served as I was production and music, And my direct report at the time quickly learned I was not good at production. And so they kind of shifted some things and made I was just music. And who would end up being a lifelong friend and mentor, a man named Dwayne Mixon, had just gotten hired as the music director. And he had this idea, what if instead of you reporting as the music guy for student ministries, what if you report to me and we have a music department that serves the whole church? And so you can kind of you will then serve in student ministries, but you'll report to me and I'll help shape you and support you, encourage you, challenge you. And so that helped serve as the foundation of what our music department looks like now. That was 2006. And so over the years, I worked in student ministries, then I worked in college ministry for about 10 years. So I've been in my current role, I want to say for 7 or 8 years. And so I serve as the music director was the old title. Now they've changed it to worship director. And so I have two people who report to me, Kaylee and Taya. So Kaylee serves our college ministry, Taya serves our student ministry. And if you look at my job description, it is like anything and everything around worship. It's like it's come up with set lists, it's onboard people to the team, maintain planning center, disciple your team, all these things. And what's funny is disciple your team is one little bullet point. As
And
one,
it's like 30 people.
it's 30 people. And I think for the longest time, uh, I don't want to say that I neglected that, but that was as I was growing in the role, a lot of what I did was like, let me execute these gatherings really well. And some of that was to the detriment of discipleship. And I had this idea that if we'll just do team nights, once every now and then, and that'll maintain a very healthy and thriving culture. And that just wasn't true. And so I mentioned earlier having gone to 10,000 Fathers and just feeling this tug that God wanted me to start something like that for our church. And so anytime we would like sit around and brainstorm as like a group, a worship team, a worship department, a common thing that would come up is like, let's write songs. I want to write a record or an EP. And for me, I was like just always sitting on, I want to start a worship school, a discipleship pathway for our team. And I would get the courage to say it every now and then, but I didn't have the courage to do it. And so it's such a long story, but I was about to turn 40. So it was the end of 2023, and I just started having all this like wilderness imagery, I think, come to me because I was about to turn 40. And I believe it's Numbers 13. Moses sends these spies into Canaan just to scope out the land. It's like, this is the land that God has promised you. Go and check it out. And then all those spies come back and they're like, we can't go in there. Yes, it's filled with all this goodness, with milk and honey, just as advertised. But they got giants, they got armies, they're fortified. We cannot go in there. And two people, Caleb and Joshua, and they're like, yeah, all that's true, but we have God on our side. So we're gonna live to tell about it. God is angry at the lack of faith. And so Moses has to go and appeal to God, is this whole thing. But essentially, that generation of unfaithful people couldn't enter in. And so I felt like the Lord was kind of like telling me, like, I've told you what I want from you. I've told you where to go. I've told you what's over there. And if you want to just sit and wait, I'll wait until someone else.
Wow.
You can die in the wilderness.
Wow.
No pressure.
Yeah, much sweeter than that. But I was like, okay, I didn't want to do it because I was afraid, and because I knew I was gonna have hard conversations. I knew that I was gonna face resistance. I knew that anytime you like work closely with people and you're trying to submit to Jesus, it creates relational tension. And so all those things, I was like, I don't want that. And so I think that that's also where the name of it comes from too. It's like, are you willing to sacrifice on behalf of what I've called you to? And so the discipleship piece, that one little bullet point on my job description over the last few years, that bullet point hasn't expanded literally, but figuratively, and the what I actually try to step into on the day-to-day basis. That's the thing. I want to help disciple our team. And beyond that, obviously, I want to help disciple our church. And I want to do it by way of Jesus. Jesus, I think sometimes we can throw like disciples kind of the buzzword right now. I don't know that I would say, yeah, Jesus discipled upwards of 5,000 people at a time. He inspired them, to that degree, but did he equip that many people all at once? I don't think so. I think he was like, he even saw, I got to equip people with proximity to my life, with access to me. And so that is the approach that I've tried to take. Like, how many people can I invite into my life? How many people can I be in their lives? And then we'll kind of go from there. So back to the original question, my job description, very broad, but over the last few years, my emphasis has been discipleship.
Yep. And on a Sunday,
What
are the main things that you do?
Yeah, so on a Sunday, I have a little microphone that has a little laser gate on it, so it's only open when I'm in front of it, and I speak to the band to give some direction, and I play guitar, and I run our little computer that has a lovely lady telling us which part it comes next and all those things.
Guide.
Yeah, a guide.
Guide.
Yeah, and I want to communicate a lot when we're not in worship, when we're not leading our church in worship. But I hope to not have to communicate at all, at least with my voice in the moment, because there's so much going on. And I think of our worship leaders especially, that they've got so much happening in their ears all at once. And then to have my voice, my deep voice being like, oh, make sure you go to this part. I don't want them to have to like have that distraction or just added noise. And so a lot of the communication I'll do during the worship set is nonverbal. It's body language, it's a facial expression, it's a emotion, that kind of thing. I think back to something that I was sharing earlier. I think one of the thorns in my side is I can't sing. I can sing, it just doesn't sound very good. And that is something I really worked on my whole life. My dad was a really good singer. And I was kind of taught, like, the way that I was raised, everything that you were good at was because you were born that way. That's what, so when I was younger, I could jump high. And it was like, I don't know where you got that from, and I was like, well, it's actually because I lifted weights and I did exercises. And so I got told a lot because I could play guitar. I was like, you got your dad's guitar playing genes, you didn't get his singing genes.
Oh,
And well, what's actually true is like, no, I practiced guitar. I didn't pick up a guitar and go, oh, I'm good at this. I had to work on it. And so from 2020 to 2023, I worked really hard to develop as a singer. I practiced every day. I did voice lessons. Like, I spent money. My wife will tell you she heard me do all the like weird vocal exercises in the shower and wherever my kids heard it. And it never translated. It never clicked. And Angel will probably tell you that's the hardest thing she's ever witnessed me work on. And so on Sundays, one thing that I've learned to love is I get to lean on people who can. And I get to like go kind of like arm in arm with people who God has equipped in this way, and like just give them like a solid foundation. Hey, I'll worry about all the technical stuff. You go and you take on the spiritual element. Obviously, we're doing every aspect together, but I think for me on a Sunday, sometimes we'll come off stage and gosh, we have such beautiful conversations, like what did God say to you? What did you sense in the room? And for me, a lot of times I was locked in because I wanted you to be able to experience that. And I wanted you to be able to hear from the Spirit what is he trying to have us lean into right now? I have learned to see the beauty, where I leave off, you begin.
Mm.
And I a lot of times when we reflect on scripture, we are really quick to point out the one, like, who wrote Corinthians, like Paul. Well, it's in the very beginning, Paul and Sosthenes. That's who wrote it. We say, who led the Israelites out of the wilderness? We say Moses. Well, according to scripture, is Moses, Aaron, and Miriam.
Mm.
And so the Lord has really shown me an appreciation for, let's do this together. I don't need to be the one.
Mhm.
Honestly, I don't even need to be one of those three.
Mm.
But where has God given me a unique gifting that I get to join that gifting with other people, and we move together, we lead.
And it makes me think about, when you talk about that bullet point of disciple your people.
Mm.
And I think, shouldn't we all have that on our job
Yeah,
description, right?
yeah,
And just how that, if you think about that and how that plays out just in where you are at work or with your children or
mm,
with friendships, like discipleship is a bullet point here,
yeah, yeah,
and like you said, just the wrestling with it. And I can see just the parallels in parenting too of, oh, this is going to be hard. This is going to be,
yeah,
relationally tough, but just
yeah,
to see and know the fruit that comes when you realize this is
mm,
my job description
yeah,
is discipleship. It's so powerful.
mhm. Yeah, and the parental part of that is huge.
Mhm.
So many church workers, church staff, pastors, unfortunately, the people they disciple the least is their children,
Mm.
because we're so focused on, gosh, Sunday's always coming, and
Right.
church is very much a what have you done for me lately
Mhm.
kind of. I don't know what to call it. It's not a business, but that's what it is. Like, you're sort of evaluated based on the most recent Sunday. And in the home, we're not evaluated to those standards. There's such grace there. And
Mhm.
so oftentimes we come home and then we just kind of breathe deep. And a thing that I can fall into is, well, I serve at my church and then I come home and I get served.
Mm.
And that is like a huge thing that, like, the Lord is like constantly trying to help remind me, is like your primary space of discipleship
Mm.
is the home. And I remember one day one of our musicians, he asked me to mentor him.
Mm.
And we'd had some really great conversations, and I was telling my wife Angel about it, and she said, I think it's amazing that you are a spiritual father to these people, but if you get to the end and Bennett says, oh, I never got to have that. I
Mm. Oh
never got to
gosh.
have that father. Then that's no victory. And I was like,
Wow.
gosh, amen. I I
Mhm.
received that gentle conviction. And I didn't have a physically present father growing up, but one of the things that I see is now fathers are physically present, but they're not emotionally,
Mm.
mentally present. And I can succumb to that too. And
Mm.
we talk about this too. Like, I see that in the church. Like, the home, the American home is starting to really be reflected in the American church. We
Mhm.
have a lot of really present mothers who are like
Mhm.
willing to give and sacrifice and serve in the home. And we see that in church. Church
Mm.
is 70% women, 30%
Wow.
men. And it's full of women who are like, I'm hungry. I want
Mhm.
to serve. I'm willing to sacrifice. And yeah, I just think it's the home needs mothers and fathers, and the church needs mothers and fathers. And so it's like I carry this in such tension, because I'm like, I think that's amazing. I think it's so beautiful that women are like getting to step into what God has called them to. And the church is like really starting to push that forward. But it makes me sad
Mhm.
that men are they're seemingly not as eager.
Mhm.
And I kind of have this picture of lions, like the male lions are huge and they're terrifying and they just lay there.
And
And
the lioness hunting and
they're doing it all,
raising
doing
the
it all.
babies,
Yeah, and
bringing the food.
yeah, and that was my experience growing up. Like I watched my mom. She worked full-time jobs, and she was also just an incredibly present mother. Like she's always on the clock. And then a lot of that, I saw from my grandmother. That we would always joke. My granddaddy loved grandmother. Grandmother loves her family, and that was kind of the way it was. And I just saw so much of the nature of God revealed in those women in my life. So I really long to, yes, empower women, but to sort of hopefully light a fire
Mhm.
in men, and with that, I want to make sure that in my haste to make disciples, that I do not remotely neglect the disciples that are in my home. That I see Angel and Evelyn and Bennett as the people that God has primarily asked me
Mhm.
to help shape and
Mhm.
form. Um, and so, yeah, I love that you have that perspective and you see discipleship. That's where it starts.
Mhm. Mhm.
And how you said, you had the team time,
Mm.
and that
Oh
would be
yeah,
enough. And
yeah,
it just gave me this picture of family too. And it's
yeah.
like, we can't just have a family game night and
Right.
that be enough.
Yeah.
There's just this whole other level
Mm-hmm.
of relationship and
Yeah.
spiritual growth that is possible there.
Yeah.
And it's fertile soil for it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, are we gonna, it may be scary, but are we
Yeah.
gonna step in and do that?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we try to visit with every conversation that we have here is like, what are our ideals within whatever context we're talking about, and then everyday life, and how quite often, most of the time, there's some kind of space between that. And sometimes your everyday life is really close to your ideals, and sometimes that space feels really
Yeah.
wide. So kind of, if that's just a gap that is kind of always shifting and changing. So what we're hoping through our conversations is to kind of say, how do we handle the fact that there is a gap?
Yeah.
Because and then also sometimes our ideals are not even the ideals that the Lord would want us to be
Mm.
idealizing.
Yeah.
So within the context of worship, and you can talk about like within your role with our band, with our worship team,
Mm.
or you can just talk about kind of broader worship as like, I'd like for you to cover both.
Yeah.
Pick where you want to start.
Yeah.
What is the ideal? What shapes that?
Mm.
And then what is everyday life
Yeah.
also?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I imagine a lot of people in my role kind of go through this trajectory where initially worship is it's the singing, it's the raising hands, it's these things. And a lot of times it's the unspoken goal. Can we get our church to respond?
Mm.
And so a lot of my early years in development were sort of oriented around that aspect of worship. And as the years have progressed, it's gone more towards what does worship look like outside of these walls? And so a lot of times when I talk about worship, I'm like, oh, a lot of times people want to know what's happening inside the walls. Like what's this supposed to look like? And so I have to come back and go, okay, yeah, what does this corporate gathering, what does worship look like here? And so I kind of see worship underneath the umbrella of loving God and loving others. That's the overarching thing. And so everything sort of fits underneath that. So, if worship is sacrifice, it's my love of God, it's my love of others that drives that sacrifice. And so, Paul says, whatever you do, whether eating or drinking, do it to the glory of God. And so it's like, okay, if my life is oriented around loving God and loving others, then my eating and drinking can be to his glory. My sacrifice for the sake of others, my forgiveness, my submitting to leadership, my, bearing with difficult people, my welcoming my enemies, blessing those who curse me. All these things are expressions of worship. And so again, so that's outside the walls ultimately. It's like, okay, what are we doing out there? And those two things though, they have to line up. In Isaiah 1 and I think it's Amos 1, they have a very similar sort of commentary and rebuke of what was essentially the church. What does worship look like? And I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially, you sing your songs and I hate the sound. You
Mhm.
light your incense and I hate the smell. Essentially, God is like, I don't want you're worshiping, but I'm not a big fan. And it's because they're not tending to the widows and the orphans. They're not caring for one another. Essentially, it's like you're making a big show of how much you love me, and you're neglecting the second half of the greatest commandment.
Mm.
So you don't get to come in and just declare how much you love me and then not love others. And so for me, I think that that's why I'm so interested in what does worship look like outside these walls, but what happens inside the walls matter too. And so right now, the thing that I'm sort of working through is, okay, how does this space, on a Sunday morning, these 20 minutes, how do these songs help us reorient around what God has called us to? How does singing the truth about who God is, how does that help remind us of who he's called us to be? And so a big thing for me is like, man, I do want us to come and sing out really loudly, even if we don't have a good voice. But more than that, I want us to then go out and live out the reality of what we've sung. And so I see Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, any corporate gathering as a moment that we reorient ourselves around the character, the practices, the person of Jesus Christ. And then we go and we live those lives outside of those walls. They're like, 168 hours in the week. It's like, man, if we come and we worship for 20 minutes of those,
Mm.
I would hate to fall into that category of Isaiah and Amos 1, where it's like, cool, you sang loud, but did you go and actually live out what you sang? That's the ideal for me, is like, can what we sing line up with our life? And yeah, I certainly fail, you know. But I think that's part of it too. One thing about me that I've learned as I've gotten older, and it's so funny because some of my friends mess with me about this. I love to be right. I have this like incessant need to be right.
It's the
The
Enneagram
one.
one.
Is it Enneagram one?
One.
Well, it's also so I'm a big fan of the fivefold or the APEST, which comes from Ephesians, but that's kind of the pitfall of the teacher. The
Mm.
teacher has this desperate need to be right. And the word repent, it comes from the Greek metanoia. Like more than that, the Hebrew word is naham, and that word is actually attributed to God upwards of like 30 times in the Old Testament. And there's nuances there, but it's like, man, if God is willing to change his mind, shouldn't I be willing to change my mind? You know? And so I have like a little list of values in my phone that I try to just remind myself. And one of them is revel in being wrong.
Mm.
Like not just be okay with it, but like actually like get excited, that you still have room to grow and you still have perspectives that need to be shifted. And so I think part of worship too is recognizing when you're wrong, and
Mm.
the quicker we can admit that, the better.
Mm. So when you said a minute ago, you said, that's the ideal,
Yeah.
but often I fail. Well, that's the
Mhm.
everyday life.
Right.
And so how do you, when you experience that, what I hear you saying is like when you fail or when you're wrong, that is evidence of your humanity, which points to your need
Yeah.
for a
Yes.
good and perfect, infallible God.
Mm.
So everyday life for the church. What about when the church is coming in and their worship is not engaging and the people aren't responding? And I know what that feels like to be
Yeah.
trying to lead and trying to
Yeah.
engage. And it seems like, we've talked about in our, I think it's our first episode for this series, we talked about like holding our coffee.
Mm.
And
I'm a coffee holder.
Yeah.
girl, I'm holding my coffee right now.
I read
Yeah.
this morning.
Oh, good. Good. Yes.
I know
Yes.
how to do it. I
Good
listened back
technique.
to, you can do
Good.
that too.
Yeah.
And I listened back to our first episode that we recorded
Yeah.
for this series this morning. And that was one of the things we talked about. What does it mean when people withhold, like when they withhold their voice
Yeah.
or when they withhold a physical expression
Yeah.
during worship? I think sometimes it's just, I know for myself, I've even felt like the need to restrain, because if I don't, and if I worship with full, like physical abandon, I'm going to be on the floor on my knees and I'm going to be a complete wreck.
Yeah.
And 20 minutes is not enough for me to turn
Yes.
around.
Yes.
Time
I
to
know.
listen to the
Yeah.
message. I'm going to be in the bathroom with Gretchen.
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel like because it's such a small amount of time and people know that, I think sometimes people can just feel like, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can fully give over all of the things that are in my heart
Yeah.
right now. Is that a reflection of the worship team's ability to engage or to
Yeah.
bring that out or to call that out or to invite? Like, is the invitation big enough or clear
Yeah.
enough or energizing enough? Sometimes I think people are just, I don't want to say held captive, but sometimes it does feel that
Yeah.
way. Like, I don't know that I can give it
Yeah.
all to the Lord right now.
Yeah.
If I lift my hands, I'm going to be on the floor on my
Yeah.
face. Or if I really confess these lyrics with my mouth,
Yeah.
then that's saying that I believe something for my family, or I believe something for this relationship, or I believe something about myself that I'm not sure I can really,
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure I'm ready to claim that yet. When you're being led to, or you're being asked to sing songs, to sing lyrics that you weren't expecting, you didn't pick those songs.
Yeah.
But you're coming in and you're, this is what you're being invited to sing, and that's what everybody else is singing. And you're kind of encountering these ideas and these articulations of truth and of God's goodness, and sometimes things about yourself that you, in that moment, you're not ready to confess with your lips. For myself, I know the natural inclination is to just withhold
Yeah.
or to restrain in those moments. And that is not a reflection of the worship team
Yeah.
or the worship
Right.
director,
Yeah.
or whether the church is spirit filled or spirit led, or whether these are authentic believers. And one of the things I shared in our first conversation for this series is that years ago, I heard a woman say, a friend who's no longer they've moved, but I want to go to a church where people are praising and they're lifting their hands and they're singing with joy. And my response to that was, you don't know what's going on. Praise God that those people are here.
Yeah.
Like, people who lift their hands and sing loud, like whether it's a night of worship or a Sunday morning service, they're coming and they're ready. What about the people who show up and they know that there's going to be music.
Yeah.
They know there will be lyrics. They know that there's a time of worship. They came knowing that was happening, and yet they're still not ready to give themselves over in fullness, their posture, their voices. But yet they're there. There's something wrestling. There's like a wrestling. There's a tension. There's something in there that, maybe it's conviction. Maybe it is just a reckoning. Maybe they're having to kind of come up against lyrics that say truth that they don't, maybe they're just not there yet. Maybe they want to believe it, but they're like, I can't be inauthentic in my worship. I don't want to say things that I'm not ready to believe yet or to claim for myself yet. So when there's, I don't know, I just have a heart of compassion when I see people who are holding their coffee or maybe their lips aren't moving. There've been times when my lips are sealed because if I breathe out a breath of a lyric, I'm going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that the Lord is working any less in me or speaking any less. That doesn't mean that the musicians, that the worship leaders, that the band, that it doesn't mean that anybody's being ineffective. It means that I'm just having a different encounter. I'm just having a different experience. We talked about experiences and emotion and things like that in some of our other episodes too. Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah.
Because that's a different experience
Yeah,
when you're
it
on the
is.
stage and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, guys, like tomorrow's not a promise. Like
Hmm.
I feel a sense of urgency
Yeah.
as a worship leader to like draw that out of people.
Yes. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that so that I feel better?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think that so much of what we do has to start with what is my motive?
Yes.
Psalm 139, search me, O God, reveal any wicked way in me. And a playful thing that I'll say sometimes is, the thing that made Jesus sinless was the purity of his motives. Because you could actually look at various things that he did, and let's say that I did them. Let's say I ran away from my mom and dad and I went to church. I don't think anyone would go, hey, good job being faithful to your father, but it's the purity of his motives, when he stands before the Sanhedrin and he rebukes them. I don't believe that God has ever called me to go before my leaders and not have a submissive heart, but because of the purity and obviously because he's God, he does that and it's sinless. And so I think that we have to start there always. When I'm stepping out on the stage, do I want them to respond because I want to feel good? Because I want to sort of be told, good job by you. It's this strange thing. Like we're meant to be sort of conduits, windows to people encountering the glory of God. But I think a lot of times, if we're honest with ourselves, we're like, I'd like to get, brushed by a little bit of that glory. I'd love to hear, gosh, what you did today. And so we have got to like work so hard to empty ourselves of any desire that we have to step up there and feel good about ourselves. We've got to like just be 100% okay with like, God, I'm emptying myself out on behalf of your church. And when I think of our time of gathering, my heart is always I want to help lead people into a time of intimacy with God. So when people ask like, how do you make your set lists? That's the answer is I'm trying to chart a pathway towards intimacy. And one of some pushback that I get now and then is like, well, does God need 25 minutes? Does God need 5? And I'm like, I don't really know what God needs. I know what we as human beings need. And intimacy takes time. You don't walk in your door and engage in intimacy, It's like we want comfort, and I think as I observe our church, I observe myself, like that's the thing that's keeping us from what we most deeply want. We most deeply want connection and intimacy. But above that is I just want to be comfortable. I just want to come in and like kind of be left alone. But beneath that, it's like there's a longing. And so how can we help people engage and feel comfortable to enter into what is maybe a little bit deeper than that? And where my heart is like just so compassionate for the church is, and we've conditioned them to be comfortable, like we have comfortable seats. The air in the room is like, scientifically proven to keep you comfortable. We serve you coffee, come and just relax. And I think somewhere in there we've unintentionally wired them. That's what church is. You come and you consume. You come and you receive. And there's some of that there, but you said earlier, you're like, I don't want to use the word captive. Like, are they captive to something? And when Moses goes to Pharaoh, he says, let my people go. We all know that part. Let my people go. But he says, so that they may worship. And so what we can learn from that is you cannot worship when you are in captivity. And so gosh, there's so much depth to this. It's like, man, what is holding us captive Monday through Saturday is not going to suddenly loosen its grip on Sunday. And that's true of us worship leaders. That's true of us, church attenders. And so that space, I think sometimes it reveals what's holding us captive. And a lot of times it's as simple as comfort is holding me captive. And I think, like you said, we have to be so careful not to ever judge. And as worship leaders, I'm like, man, let's not scold our people. Let's not plead with them and beg them to respond. Let's model it. Let's invite them into it. And I think, though, part of it is, where are moments that we can equip them? Where can we take a little bit of time to kind of give context? This is why we sing. This is what Scripture says about about singing. This is what Scripture says about lifting your hands. Paul says to Timothy, my wish is that men everywhere would lift up holy hands in the sanctuary. And I think, man, if we just shared that sometime from stage, like, don't worry about what I say, but like, you don't know me. Maybe you don't trust me. Do we trust Paul? Do we trust the person who wrote the majority of the New Testament? Probably. So let's do it. Try what he says.
Just see what happens.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of it is equipping, and there is something to the response, and it being an external response. And I think there's lots of factors, but some of it too is maybe my response doesn't actually reflect what's happening in my heart. Like, maybe I don't believe these words. Maybe I'm just not an expressive person. I don't sing. I don't lift my hands. I'm not expressive. And I think sometimes we think that that is hypocrisy.
Mm.
If my actions don't line up with my feelings, I'm a hypocrite. But the truth is, it's when our actions don't line up with our convictions. That's hypocrisy. And so when we are equipped with truth, like, okay, it's actually a command to sing. So whether I've got a good voice or not, I'm gonna submit to that conviction. And when I think where I saw this in some of my own life, when my daughter was born, I was so excited to be a father, because in part I didn't have a present father. And so I was like, man, I get to like step into this. I get to break the cycle. And my daughter loved her mom so much more. It was very noticeable. And by the time my son was born, they're 5 years apart. My son, he adores everybody, so he adored me. And so I think my daughter was like, I mean, I guess if he likes him, I'll. And so now my daughter and I, we have a amazing relationship. But when she was younger, I remember one day I came home from work. I almost said from school. Came home from work, and she almost like mechanically, she goes, "Hey, Daddy, how was work today?" And then she looked right at her mom, like, did I do good? And so I knew that she was doing that not out of the purity of heart of like, I'm really interested in how your day was, Dad, but from a prompt from her mom. Why don't you try to take an interest? Try this. And because I love my daughter, I didn't go, no, your mom just told you to say that. I was like, you know what? I see that you're trying to put in effort, and that is beautiful to me. This is how my day was. And she was unaware, but with that practice, that mechanical response turned into a genuine response. So, as weeks passed, Dad, how was your day? And no longer looking at mom for approval, did I do it right? It helped to actually give way to a genuine relationship. And so I think sometimes that's what I would love to help our church like walk into. I know this is uncomfortable, but if you feel like God is turning his nose up at your faithful obedience to say like, I don't know if I buy into this, but I trust you. And so you can have it. And so I think that some of that, they just need to be helped. We just need to open that door. And my favorite scripture about worship, it's Hebrews 12:28. Since we've received a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us worship acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. And I think reverence is a word that sometimes we think of like, let me be reverent, let me be still, let me be solemn, and I'm stepping in here and I'm reverent. But reverence is really it's correct response. It's not solemn reservation. It's correct response. And so the way that we respond, it matters, and it's like if I were to ever say to my wife, gosh, I love you so much in here, in my heart, I love you so much. And she says, well, show me. Like, no, why do I have to show you? It's in my heart. And I think sometimes that's our posture on Sundays. God, I love you so much in here. I love you so much in my heart, but I'm unwilling to give you my voice. I'm willing to give you my hand, whatever it may be. And again, it's like there are people, they've been conditioned their whole lives. Worship in the Catholic Church looks one way. I was raised in a Baptist church where we weren't allowed to clap our hands. That is an unacceptable form of worship. And so I think too, our role as worship leaders, we're never like, the win is not, did that person who's never sung, did they sing today? That's not the win. But I think it is, over time, can we as a church family respond rightly, to what God has done, to who he is. And so sometimes our response is going to reflect that.
What would you say that it's never too late for?
It's never too late to lead a life of sacrifice. And the sacrifice looks different, for different people, obviously. And for me, a sacrifice is any time I use my voice. And I think for years, I was unintentionally withholding that. I was withholding that from God. And I think that was like, okay, God, you didn't wire me to be an eloquent speaker. So you're not calling me into that. When the truth was, I was kind of a coward. And so sacrifice for me really is anytime I use my voice. And it's a deep wrestling, because it's like, okay, I know I'm going to lose sleep the night before. I know my heart rate's going to be elevated, all these things. I was probably 34 when I had that revelation. Like, oh, I've withheld something from God. And so, yeah, I was 34 when I was like, okay, God, you can have this. I'll sacrifice in this way. And so I think what we need to do is we just need to take inventory. And what am I withholding from you, God? And ask God to like reveal that thing to us, or those things, all of them, and be willing to then purpose them for his sake and for his kingdom.
So I think that leads really well into the action steps part of our conversation. But before we start that, what I'm also hearing you say is that being part of this conversation is a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so we are grateful for that.
Yeah.
Did you sleep last night?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I think conversations are relatively easy.
Okay.
But knowing this is gonna live,
In perpetuity.
Yeah, great word. Yeah, but anytime the number is great. And anytime I have to get like getting the attention of a room, that is awful. I observe Angel living in perpetual sacrifice. Like, she's always serving. And gosh, so I don't know what I would, if I like, in all honesty, if I were to observe her life and go, hey, let me offer something that maybe you could consider sacrificing. Because it not only would that be audacious, but I would have a hard time pinpointing this is where you could grow, because she just lives in perpetual sacrifice. I think the thing for her, the sacrifice, is what she has is worth offering to others, because she sees our home and she's like, this place is a disaster. It is not worth offering to anyone. And so I can't be hospitable to anyone because I'm inviting them into something that's not good. And that's the enemy that's convincing her of that. And I love the parable of the widow and the coin. She had one coin and she gave it. And it's like, whatever you have, if you're entertaining this voice that's saying it's not good enough. And what ends up happening is we spend so much time trying to get that. We try to elevate that thing. It's like, God, you can have it once it's here. And it's like, actually, God, he wants it right now.
Mhm.
He wants it right now. And so it's really cool because I've seen angels step into that more.
Mm.
And sometimes it's out of like, it's forced. Like, hey,
Mhm.
this person's coming over. It's happening. Okay, here you go. You can have it. So yeah, it looks different for everyone.
To kind of wrap up our conversation and get back into the action steps part, would you kind of walk us through starting with taking an inventory and just kind of give 2 or 3 things that you would encourage our listeners to do within the context of worship and
Mm,
worship as a lifestyle and as
yeah.
a believer?
Yeah. If we long to lead lives of sacrifice, we first have to take inventory. What am I willing to sacrifice to God? And then what am I withholding from God?
Mhm.
And I imagine that those lists are probably going to be pretty weighted
Mhm.
towards the latter.
Mhm.
And if I'm really honest with myself, I'm withholding a lot from God. And so the more I ask the Lord to search me and uncover those things, then I couple that with a heart that says, God, help me. And then also I need the accountability of close friends with that too.
Mhm.
I need to confess those things like, hey, if I'm honest, I'm withholding this from the Lord. And so can you hold me accountable to that? And I think the best accountability that we can have in our lives is when people like are willing to tell you you are not walking in the authority
Mhm.
that God has placed in your life. You're walking underneath the authority of fear.
Mhm.
You're walking underneath the authority of insecurity, of doubt, whatever it may be, scarcity. And you need to walk in the authority of what God's called you to. And ultimately, God has called us to purpose ourselves for the sake of his kingdom. And so take inventory. I mean, it can be as practical as like really making a list.
Mhm.
And we don't have to fix it all right now. You know, it's not okay, let me figure out how to empty it all today. But take a step. Maybe what's the biggest thing that you're withholding from God? And then what are some ways that you can begin to give that to the Lord? It can be an act of forgiveness.
Mhm.
You know, Jesus says in Matthew 5, if you bring your gift to the altar and you remember that a brother has an issue with you, go and make things right. And I think a great like modern parallel for us is like, hey, when you come in here and sing and you remember, oh wait, I've got a grudge. You know, I'm holding back something or I'm holding something against a fellow child of God. Jesus is essentially saying your first act of worship is be right with that person. Leave your song, go make things right. So maybe the sacrifice is extending forgiveness to someone. Maybe it's having a more willing heart to serve in your home. I think for me, one of the things, the voice of the Holy Spirit is always saying, "Help with the dishes, help with the dishes," and I will be honest and say I often say no. And so even in this moment, I'm like, I need to go home and do the dishes. And then, you know, I think in terms of corporate worship, when we go to our churches, those moments are sacred because we do get to express affection towards a good and loving God. And I think whenever I really take a moment to think about the magnitude of what we get to do, that the creator of heaven and earth and the entire universe is inclined to listen when we speak to him. And so when we go, okay, God, you can have my voice. You're worthy of my voice because it's as I declare the truth about who you are, I proclaim that, then I can receive the truth about who I am in you. And so maybe the step is like be willing to step out of your comfort zone a little bit in the context of your church. And so that could be singing, that could be talking to someone who you avoid in the hallways. You know, it's just maybe every aspect of our lives kind of carrying with it an openness to God, what are you calling me to lay at your feet? And give me the strength and the courage to follow through.
Those are very powerful. As I'm listening to you saying, like, even just making a list, confessing the things, naming the things, there's so much power in that
Yeah.
because then you see that once you've named it, there's something that is removed between you and the Lord and it brings you closer. And that builds the bridge to get you closer to worshiping in fullness to God's goodness, because you named the thing that you're withholding. You forgave the person that you've held a grudge against, and he's still there.
Yeah.
And he's still loving you, and he's still caring for you, and he's still extending grace to you. And so when you experience that, that inclines you to worship, that inclines you to respond. I have a couple lists to
Yeah.
Definitely. So
Yeah.
good.
So one of the fun things that Gretchen and I have done, and we've mentioned it a few times in our other conversations in this series, if we've been putting together a Spotify playlist with worship songs. And so we would love for you to add to that. And we would also like to invite our listeners to send us ideas. So we'll have a few posts on social media where our listeners, we hope that you will take a moment and put your suggestions for songs that we can add. And then we will make sure that you have access to the link for that playlist so that you can listen and participate. Brooks, we are very grateful for your time, for your voice, for your wisdom and your heart for worship and the way that you lead and shepherd our team so well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Just a wealth of wisdom and scripture and things to ponder. And it's really, really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an honor.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And we hope that you will find a moment with us next time.